completed it. You're done. You did it. It's a granny square. It's the perfect granny square in my opinion. Today I'm going to show you how to make the perfect granny square. And I know there's a lot of granny square tutorials out there, and I've probably watched all of them. But over the years I've discovered my favorite methods, and so I just want to share my little tips with you, and so that you can see how I make my perfect granny square. So first I'm going to start off using, this is a 4-weight yarn, a 4mm hook, and you can use any yarn, any hook. That's what's so beautiful about the granny square. But I'm going to start off with doing a magic circle, and if you need to slow down this section, you can. I'm going to try and do it slowly so you can see, but I just hold the yarn with my pinky and my thumb, wrap it around my hands, cross it over to make an X, bring this back down around, put it in the same spot, turn my fingers around, put my hook through, grab this yarn, twist my hook, and then this yarn here I yarn over, and essentially I'm doing a chain. It's hard to show, but essentially I'm doing a chain, and that is my magic circle. And I untwist this because when you pull this, it closes the magic circle. So that is how I started. So there's my magic circle, and I am going to start off my granny square with a stacked single crochet. And so this is something that I do. Once I discovered it, it became my favorite thing to do. So I'm going to do a single crochet into the magic circle, and then I am going to stack another single crochet on top of this. So you'll see these two loops here. I'm going to go into this one here, pull up a loop and yarn over and make another single crochet. And so this will count as a double crochet. So this is going to count as my first double crochet. Now I don't always use stitch markers, but for the purposes of this tutorial I'm going to use a stitch marker. So I'm just going to mark top of that stitch, so you'll know that is the first double crochet of the round. And so now I'm going to do 2 more double crochets, and so I will show you what that looks like. So a double crochet is yarn over, go through, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull 2 through, pull 2 through, pull through 2. So here is our first granny cluster. A granny cluster is 3 double crochets worked into the same space or stitch. And so since that first stacked single crochet was a double crochet, technically it's not, but it's counting as a double crochet, that is our first cluster. A first cluster of 3 double crochets. And then I'm going to go ahead and chain 1. So this chain 1 is going to be for the corner, but we'll learn more about that in the next round. So I'm going to do another granny cluster, which is 3 double crochets worked into the same space. So I'm going to yarn over, go through my stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and I'm going to do that 2 more times. Alright, so we've got our first granny cluster here, a chain, and then another granny cluster here. We're going to do another chain, and do the same thing, another granny cluster here. So that's 3 double crochets worked into the same space. That's 1, 2, and 3. And now I'm going to do another chain, and work my last granny cluster. So that's 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to do a chain. And now I'm going to close up this magic circle. So I'm going to untwist the little tail. Leave a pretty good length of tail here when you start, because that will be to be tied in at the end. So I'm going to close up my magic circle, and I'm going to slip stitch into the top of this where I have it marked, the top of that stacked single crochet. So I'm just going to go into that stitch, pull through, and so that is our first round. Eek! So what you can see here is we have, let me take the stitch marker out now. What you're going to see here is that we have the tail, first of all. We have a granny cluster, a chain, a granny cluster, a chain, a granny cluster, a chain, a granny cluster, a chain. So we've got 4 chains, and this is why it's a granny square, because it has 4 corners. And so we're going to start the next round. So into this space, directly below where we just slip stitched, you're going to do a stacked single crochet. Every round is going to start this way from now. So we're going to go into that corner, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. That is a single crochet. And we're going to find, so there's two loops, and we're going to go through this one on the left, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through. And so that stitch there is going to become our first double crochet. So I'm just going to mark that. And then we'll do 2 double crochets into that same space. This is the first half of our corner. And so you've got that 1 cluster there. And now we're going to go into this next chain 1 space and make a corner. So this is how you make a corner, is you do a granny cluster, which is 3 double crochets worked into that same space. So 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to chain 1 and work another granny cluster into the same space. So there will be 1, 2, 3. So we've got a cluster, a chain, a cluster, and that's making our first corner. So we're going to go down to the next corner and do the same exact thing. So you go find your corner space, it's just the next space there, chain 1 space, and we're going to make a granny cluster. 1, 2, 3, chain 1, and do another granny cluster into that space because we're making our corners. So 2, 3. So each corner is granny cluster, chain 1, granny cluster. So now we found our next corner space here. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do a granny cluster. And if I'm going too fast, you can slow the playback speed. But every corner is the same. It's a granny cluster, chain 1, and a granny cluster, all into the same space. 1, 2, 3. And now we've reached where we had our stitch marker, so into this space where we worked that cluster, we're going to finish that corner. So since we already have a granny cluster, we're just going to make a granny cluster so that we have 2 granny clusters. And I hope that it's making sense. So we've worked 3 double crochets, and now we need to put a chain in between them, and now I'm going to slip stitch to this first marked stacked single crochet. And so now we have the second round done, and we have our 4 corners complete. And so now we have our 4 corners, 1, 2, 3, 4, where we put our chains. So that's our chain 1 spaces. But what we also have are these new spaces here between these clusters, and those are our side spaces. And so you'll do something a little bit different there. I'm going to fasten off with this color. So I'll just chain 1, cut off a tail, and I'm going to add another color. Alright, so I am going to add this blue, and what you can do for that is I just like to go through that corner we just came out of. You can go into any corner, so just go into that corner we just came out of and pull up the yarn and leave a long tail, and I just chain 1 to attach it. You can tie on the yarn, you can do whatever you like. It's totally up to you, but that's how I do it. I just chain 1. It's not super secure, but once you do your first stitch, it will be. So we are going to start how we always start a round, is a stacked single crochet. So I'm going to single crochet into this space, this corner space, and then it's kind of hard to see with this yarn, maybe you can see it. Into that loop on the left, I'm going to do another single crochet, and that is our first stacked single crochet, which counts as a double crochet, and I'm going to mark the top of that so it's easier to find. And so I need to complete this granny cluster by doing 2 more double crochets, because each granny cluster has 3 double crochets. Alright, so we have our first half of the corner done. Every round starts by doing just the first half of the corner. So now we've reached a side space, and so in a side space, it's really simple. You just work a granny cluster. No chains or anything, just 3 double crochets to be a granny cluster, and that's all you do on the side spaces. That's it. So now we've reached the next corner. You know it's a corner because it has 2 double crochets worked into the same space, and there's a chain between them. So my top tip is, when you see a corner, make a corner. So how you make a corner is a cluster, a chain, a cluster, all in the same space. So I'm going to do a granny cluster, which is 3 double crochets, chain 1, and do a granny cluster, and this is all in the same space. See a corner, make a corner. Perfect. Now you've reached the next side space, and so what you do in a side space is you just do a granny cluster. That's it. Alright, and then in the next corner space, you can tell it's a corner because you've got this chain 1 space, and there's 2 clusters worked into the same spot. See a corner, make a corner. We're going to do a cluster, a chain, and a cluster. If at any time I'm moving too fast for you, you can just change the playback speed so that it looks like I'm going a little bit slower. So that's the next corner done, and we've reached a side space. And so we're going to work a granny cluster. Simple. No chains, just a granny cluster. Ooh, and we've reached a corner. So we're going to make a corner. See a corner, make a corner. And I'm going to do a cluster, a chain, and a cluster. A cluster, a chain, and a cluster. And don't get frustrated if it's making absolutely no sense. When you first learn something, it doesn't usually make sense, but if you keep trying, you'll get better at it. Then I've reached a side space, so I'm going to do a cluster. And we've reached that first half of the corner, and so what I'm going to do is complete that corner by making a cluster. So there will be 2 clusters in there. So I'm doing 3 double crochets into that space. And then I will chain 1 and slip stitch to the top of that stacked single crochet. I do advise marking this stitch if you feel like you might be confused about where you're supposed to go. So I would advise marking that stitch. Alright, so now what we have is our 4 corners that we made, and now we have extra side spaces. So if you look, you can see you've got your corners, and then you've got these side spaces. You've got your corners, and now you've got 2 side spaces on every side. And so you'll be doing the same thing over and over again. When you reach a side space, you just do a granny cluster. No chains, just 1 granny cluster in each space. And when you reach a corner, you make a corner. So I'm going to fasten off, because I'm going to add a new color. And I'm just going to show you that you can go into any corner to add. So I'm going to just go into this corner over here. I actually like to alternate corners, because otherwise all your ends kind of end up on one space. So I am going to be on the right side here. I'm going to go into this corner here. Just put my hook through and yarn over with the new color, pull it up, and leave a pretty good tail. Chain 1 just to secure it. And now I'm going to start how I start every single round, which is a stacked single crochet. So I'm doing a single crochet, and then into this loop on the left I will do another single crochet, and I will mark the top of that stitch because that is where I'll slip stitch at the end. And I will do the first half of the corner, so I'll do 2 more double crochets so that we have a granny cluster. Now I've got to do a granny cluster into each of these spaces, so I will do my cluster into this space, and then I will do my cluster into this space, and now I've reached the corner, which I can tell is the corner because it looks like a corner. But it has 2 clusters separated by a chain, so I'm going to do the same thing because I saw a corner, make a corner. See a corner, make a corner. We got a cluster, a chain, and a cluster. And now I've reached the 2 side spaces. I'm going to do 1 cluster in each space. And now I've reached a corner, so I'm going to make a corner in there. Right now I've got my 2 side spaces. Alright, now I've reached the corner where I started, so I'm going to complete that corner by doing another cluster into that corner. And then I'm going to chain 1 and slip stitch into the top of that first marked stitch. And I'm going to fasten off because I'm done with this square. Alright, as you can see, I've completed the square. You've got the 4 corners, and then now you've got 3 side spaces on each side. So every round you're going to increase your side spaces by 1, and your 4 corners will remain as just 4 corners because it's a square. Then the only thing you really need to do is tie in your ends, and for some reason I can't find my needle. You've completed it. You're done. You did it. It's a granny square. It's the perfect granny square in my opinion.